Now here he calls it the cosmology of the Egyptians and Babylonians. Objectivists might well more phrase it the metaphysical sense of life. Okay? The metaphysical sense of life of the Egyptians and Babylonians. Cosmology, metaphysical sense of life. The metaphysical sense of life of the Babylonians and Egyptians was so different from what the Greeks came up with that scholars have called it the Greek miracle. As you know, if you've seen my videos on The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton, she complains about that. She says nowadays they teach about the Greek miracle. We all know Greece was the most important, but we don't know why they call it a miracle. I don't know if they had ever discovered why Greece was so important before. I would put big money on the idea that only objectivists can see the full value in the ancient Greeks, because other people would have rationalistic value strains on things unrelated and would say this was valuable about the Greeks, that was valuable about the Greeks, which are non-essentials. Perhaps that's just my off the top of my head meandering thoughts about that. Let us continue. The Greek miracle. Study of the antecedents in earlier Greek and Near Eastern cultures does something to lessen this miraculous element, but leaves us with considerable admiration for the first 2 centuries of Greek science and philosophy, from about 600 BC to 400 BC. Now, there were some crucial factors leading to the Greek miracle. Quote, "We recognize the importance of the change from bronze civilization to an Iron Age civilization, a change made possible by the improvement of the techniques for reducing and working iron. These improved techniques appear toward the end of the 2nd millennium BC. Now, we've already looked at this. Assyria was the first empire to come on stage as a major user and producer of iron. Something happened somewhere, and in a period of centuries, iron production got cheaper and more thoroughly and widely known. Now, those of you who wonder where did we get started on iron? Where did we get started on bronze? How did we get started? Where did we get metal out of rocks, for God's sakes? Well, it started when we got fire, and we had rocks near fire, and in some areas of the world, particularly rich rocks had bizarre effects. That's one of the hypotheses I have heard. I don't know how accurate that is, but just to plant a bug in your brain, you can read up on that on your own. I will be investigating that in some minor depth in my History of Science series, if I commence that, which I plan to and hope to. Now then, about iron working. These improved techniques appear toward the end of the 2nd millennium BC in the 1100s, or the 12 or 1300s. The cheap production of tools and weapons resulting from that change must have been an important factor in the ability of the smaller Greek city-states to compete successfully in trade with the more centralized monarchies of the Near East. Of at least equal importance, no doubt, was the development of the alphabet, which tradition would have us believe originated in Phoenicia about 1200 BC. Now, I don't know about that. I've heard 1600 BC. I don't know how accurate this gentleman may or may not be completely accurate on that. I don't know. And which spread to areas of Greek culture sometime after the turn of the millennium. That's true, sometime after the turn of the millennium, but there was a dark age. Up to 800 BC there was no use of the alphabet. They got it before the turn of the millennium and lost it. So just adopt that as a partial inaccuracy. Adoption of alphabetic writing did not, of course, initiate anything like popular education, but the comparative ease with which alphabetic writing can be learned certainly made possible a wider distribution of learning than had prevailed in the earlier monarchies, where writing and reading were the property of an exclusively scribal priestly class. The independence of the commercial-minded inhabitants of Miletus, an Ionian city on the coast of Asia Minor, the possible weakness of the ties between the governing classes of Miletus and older religious orthodoxy of the cities of the mainland, the immediate contact, this is a run-on sentence and we're giving the reasons, the immediate contact with the more cultured people of Asia Minor, who had drawn their culture from Mesopotamia and Egypt, and the occasional direct contacts with the culture of Mesopotamia and Egypt themselves. All these factors, and no doubt others, helped to produce the natural philosophy associated with the school of Miletus and its traditional founder, Thales of Miletus. So we wonder about that miracle of the Ionian Greeks off the coast of Asia Minor there. He says, here are the factors: the independence of commercial-minded inhabitants of Miletus, the possible weakness of the ties between the governing classes of Miletus and the older religious orthodoxy of the cities of the mainland, the immediate contact with the more cultured people of Asia. And now, how would that cause intellectual surpassing of the Asian thought? Slingshot them past the Asian thought? Okay, maybe. Who would these Asia people in Asia Minor, who had drawn their culture from Mesopotamia and Egypt, and occasionally direct contact with Mesopotamia and Egypt. All these factors no doubt helped produce the Ionian Miracle, where philosophy and natural science came into existence for the first time known in history, had many causes, one of which may have been contact with other civilizations which didn't develop these things. I don't know. Like I say, sometimes you just have to say somebody thought a thought, and before that everyone thought not. We should not set aside the undoubted effect of the changing mythology and the evolution of the natural philosophy and science among the Greeks. Now, the mythology of the Greeks has an interesting effect. We've seen some of that. But one of the things that the Greek thinkers have an effect on mythology with is that they said the gods happen within reality. So sure, mythology is intertwined with science and belief in metaphysics and stuff, metaphysical beliefs, but they also believed metaphysics to have primacy, or existence to have primacy. I think that's a more proper way to say it. We're now in chapter 4, Greek medicine and biology. Page 55. We cut a bit. We're talking about the development of medicine. Quote, the Greeks created a secular medicine that often employed the methods of observation and experience. The tradition of rational and even experimental medicine, although there is some doubt of this, is usually extended back to the beginning of the 5th century BC. That'd be the 480s, the 490s, to the natural philosopher and physician Alcmaeon of Croton in southern Italy, perhaps a Pythagorean. Now we quote from the Pre-Socratic Philosophers by Freeman, Oxford, 1946. Quote, his detailed work on the nature of the senses was based on experiment. Tradition records that he was the first to, quote, dare to undertake the excision of an eye, end quote. This clearly refers to a surgical operation on a human subject, and he profited by this opportunity, and doubtless also by dissection, to examine the eye and the brain. Now again, that's in the 5th century BC. He wanted to know this stuff. After this, after the religious revival, it becomes more difficult to examine a corpse. Indeed, in the Renaissance in Europe, it was very difficult for the thinkers and natural philosophers of the time to get hold of a corpse. Very difficult, because there were religious laws against violating a dead body and stuff. Medicine was held back just by stupid religious laws, like you can't clone things and stuff. A number of medical schools seem to have grown up in the course of the 5th century, of which the one that achieved the greatest fame both in its own day and with posterity was the school on the island of Kos, C-O-S. The works that emerged from this school were codified quite early under the name of the greatest physician of the school, Hippocrates, who flourished about 420 BC. The so-called Hippocratic corpus contains some 70 works which date from the time of Hippocrates to about 300 BC. The problem